Hi there. Yeah, so at least I hadn't prepared anything for this discussion because I thought the idea would mostly be to see what everybody is interested in working in terms of methods research. Just a quick recap. So 2021, most of the method research has focused, perhaps unsurprisingly, on COVID. So one of the biggest projects I was involved in was the EU Maze project, where we looked at methods for estimating vaccine safety. Jenna has been working a lot on a very large project on prediction, seeing how well prediction models translate when you switch out the phenotype definitions, or if you switch from one um, uh, database to another, so basically one environment of data to another, to see how well those models port. I know there's been other methods research, but as we're getting to the end of 2021, I'd like to take this opportunity to perhaps just brainstorm on, well, what are the things that we want to focus on in terms of methods research in 2022. And I'm deliberately not priming anyone in any or pushing anyone in any direction. I really want to have a very open brainstorm, just an open discussion where anything goes. I'm just curious what people are thinking are important topics that OHDSI should tackle in 2021, 22. Jenna, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think a brainstorm would be good. Maybe as well, at some point, we could discuss like how best to approach the collaboration. So like, how do people propose new research and stuff?
Yep, that's a great idea. So let me just open up the floor. Anybody have suggestions of things they think they want or they would like to see OHDSI working on in terms of methods research? George.
Just to say, like, I don't know that this is the top priority, but I would like to continue working on unmeasured confounding. I mean, it's the kind of thing that will never be the highest priority because there'll always be something we're trying to solve, like vaccine safety or vaccine efficacy. But if you don't do it, then you don't do it ever. So I would like to continue working on that. Not just LSPS, but different methods, low dimensional models. Chan has spoken up in the past about his interest in that. And of course, you and you're co-author on these papers anyway. But so that would be an area. I'm not saying it's a super high priority at any given time, but I'd like to put some cycles aside for it.
All right. And so is that, yeah, I guess you're specifically talking about causality assessment or inference, and then how robust we are to basically the assumption of unmeasured confoundings. Okay.
Yeah. So causal inference and how robust is that? And it's mostly about unmeasured confounding.
Sounds good. All right, Patrick posted something. Let me. Oh, Patrick, you're here. Why don't you just say it out loud what you wrote in the chat?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm still interested in the opportunity for us to develop a large-scale safety surveillance system for all medical products and to do that internationally. I think the specific area that George and Mark and I have been discussing with the FDA is in the paradigm of signal detection, trying to figure out more appropriate ways to quickly identify safety issues, but also quickly conclude that you're confidently safe, that some medical product does not cause some effect. But I think to do that, we need better methods for synthesizing evidence that goes across databases, across methods, across multiple looks at the data, across phenotypes that might be correlated. And so how to bring the evidence together across the system. I don't think we have explicit decision thresholds that we understand their operating characteristics. And I think that would be a good area to focus on.
Hi, this is Jenna, and I wanted to second that and maybe expand that a little bit. In order to more effectively do that, I feel like we also need almost like a data collection on what's the feasible time to onset, what is the correlation structure that's important as well, what are the kind of clusters of the people that we should be looking at or should not be looking at. So that speaks to the earlier point that George made about the confound, and to really understand better what's going on so that we can make a better decision on the safety arena. And to add to that, I don't know if I ever brought it up, Patrick, but what about exposure, estimation of exposure, effectiveness of the risk minimization strategies? Can we also add that to the list? Thanks.
Yep, thanks. That's your last point is also very interesting in that we tend to focus on the safety, but certainly effectiveness is the other side of the coin that we definitely need to get a better handle of.
I have a thought.
Yep, go ahead.
Just date shift, I think, is a general problem we need to figure out how to handle. So there are changes in how data are captured and how care is delivered. There are population changes and changes in social circumstances, all of which make data non-equivalent over time in ways that we need to learn how to model and ameliorate, because they affect all of our data that require some sort of longitudinal inference, and there's not a general purpose strategy for modeling that and how to accommodate what we learn through modeling and analyses that we do.
Yeah, so is that, just trying to understand what you're saying, is that more on a database level or within a specific study that you're worried about? Like, is it time varying confounding, or is it more broad, like the
I think even time varying confounding assumes that you've got the confounder measured in an equivalent way at, across the period of time that you're looking at. So there's an assumption that it means the same thing at, in the first year of analysis and in the last year. And that may and often isn't true. We know through just, having seen what happened during the epidemic, all kinds of things have happened, both in terms of how data are captured, in terms of how care are delivered, in terms of people's ability to access care and who and so on. So I think a lot of the methods that we use assume that something measured at time A and at time B are subject to the same set of things. And we know that's not true, but we don't have a standard strategy for modeling how it isn't true, why it isn't true, and responding to that as we apply methods, whether it's time varying covariates or another method that is same. So things are not staying the same over time, not just in terms of their impact on a model, but in our ability to see them and who's getting data that we can see, et cetera. So there's just a need for a deep think about how our methods should accommodate that fact, I think.
Okay, so just to give a concrete example, so imagine that sensitivity of a phenotype would shift over time. Like, we would be very good at capturing it, say in the year 2020, but all of a sudden bad in 2021 because of differences in coding practices or something. That would be something that you're thinking about.
It might be that's one example. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's really many. So as I said, I tried to list, and I'll put it in the chat. I think care delivery changes, right? Practices evolve. So if we're talking about the effectiveness of a practice, how effectively it is delivered changes over time. The population that receives, has an exposure changes over time as people are sequestered or doing other things. The specific phenotype definition may change over time as codes come into existence or are deprecated, or the assiduousness with which they are collected and brought into the data sets that we use shifts as their importance changes. There's just all of these different factors that make what look like the same kind of data mean something different depending on when it happens, that we haven't fully figured out. And I think when there are trivial things, maybe it's safe to assume it gets lost in the noise. But when there are seismic things, then they don't get lost in the noise, and we don't really have a great sense of how to assess whether something's trivial or seismic. Just to put it.
Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
Okay.
Martijn, the discussion between when Patrick and Eugenia mentioned about the importance of the having a specific methodology for the signal, and especially after the vaccine problem with the adverse events, and having specific methods. It's really important because even the definition of the terminology is really different between the different regulatory bodies. What is in the FDA, it might be different from the European medicine agencies. Even the methodology that now for the that we have for the know if this event is really due to the vaccine or even the drug itself. And we have a lot of methodology, at least from a regulatory point of view, that being used. We're not sure if this is really accurate or not. I know there's some work with the UMS project. It's really great work that will help. But I think there's also a lot of work need to be done in this area. And also the point of the measurement of the effectiveness of risk minimization measures is really, really, really important, because no one is actually focusing in this point. Like we do a lot of these activities, but no one know if these activities that being done by regulatory authorities or pharmaceutical company are effective or not. So they do that, and we don't know. So I think these are some of the points that OHDSI we might really focus on, because for me at least, I don't see many people are really focusing at this point.
There's been, sorry to continue on that, there's been a few publications on more common safety event. I think one drug that was, the data was published in 2019 on the effectiveness in high blood pressure population where it's not supposed to be taken. So they did see some effect, some reduction in applying this medication in this risk population post implementation of the safety measures. But they did use, I don't think we have them, at least I haven't seen those. There's some data from Finland, UK, I think Netherlands, that was a big database they used. I can share with the group if you're interested, but there's been some attempts. I don't know if they're formalized in any way, but it's going that way.
Thanks. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind posting some of the links to the papers that you mentioned in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
All right, just curious, other ideas or maybe completely different directions of methods research? Nothing related to prediction?
Jenna, maybe it'd be worthwhile, since we've been having a lot of interesting conversations here at AMIA, maybe it'd be worthwhile for you just to share kind of some of the things we've seen at AMIA and how it's made you reflect on guidance that we need and what methods research we might actually want to consider for best practices for prediction.
Yeah, so one thing I've seen is that this year there was kind of, I don't know if it was less previous years, to be honest, I didn't really notice, but I think it's really been highlighted more as like kind of the bias in the models. So I think that's something that we haven't actually got anything. I know Ross is working on something about that, adding in some metrics, but I guess working on that and then just maybe doing some evaluation of the predictions could be a very simple paper to do, just looking how well it does, although our data is a bit limited. So that was one thing that's kind of been highlighted a bit more here. And then there have been some talks about kind of, I feel like this isn't necessarily in this conference, but in general, there's more of a focus towards benefits of models now. So maybe some metrics or for us to kind of like evaluate the benefit of models. So not just the error under the receiver operating curve, which a lot of people and a lot of papers are saying actually is kind of quite a narrow perspective for prediction, but actually looking at other metrics and focusing more on PPV and kind of weighing that with how useful a true positive to a false positive or a false negative and such is.
Thanks.
I mean, just a thought, Jenna, related to like evaluating the benefit of models. I'm thinking about some sort of like predictive algorithm that predicts the probability of some adverse event and indicates some treatment decision that a physician might make. Is there a way to sort of take a look at people who, if they were concordant with some hypothetical treatment decision that would have been made based on your metric, can you take a look at like the hypothetical benefit to patients had you had broader use of your model to inform decision making? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think I mean, it's hard to assess with our data the benefit, but I think like if you can say to someone, what do you think the likely benefit of a true positive is versus the negatives of a false positive, or maybe even just think as well, like a lot of the times that I think this is what Nigan was saying in his talk. He was saying that you're often constrained. So the whole error in the receiver operating characteristic curve is kind of junk, because there's actually a big section of that where you can't really act on anyway, because you don't have the manpower to, for example, screen 80% of the population. You may only be able to screen 10% of the population. So you really want to focus on that, on like if we could do some intervention to 10% of the subpopulation, how well would we do, or some subset of that. So that's kind of really, I think, where it could be interesting. So if we can get some sort of constraints put in of like realistically how much can we do in this area, and how much can this prediction actually impact people, then I think that's going to be useful.
Andrew, you've been typing in the chat some more ideas. Could you say them out loud? I know you're not shy.
I've got too many ideas as usual. I don't know how many of them are worth listening to in a large group like this, but let's see. The second one is just a version of the first. So there's the same kind of factors that vary over time can vary with respect to data sources at a given time, and will also, I think I put them in that order on purpose, because I think if we make progress within data sources and helping to model those, and some approach to taking what we learn from modeling them and applying that to an analysis, we should start to be able to do that across data sets to some degree. And I think it's the combination of those things, how things vary over time and how they vary with respect to the different data sources contributing to an analysis, that we'd ultimately want to have a coordinated approach to. But that's the second idea. The third one is just how much impact the fact that we have a convenience sample, a large convenience sample at any given time, impacts. It creates bias in our data. So some unified strategy for assessing when there's reliable reference data that we could consider a source of truth to assess bias in our sample, if there's large scale epidemiologic studies that we think should serve as a good source of truth to say our incidence or prevalence or other things derived from them are off base. That I don't think we have a consistent way of doing that, or a strategy for trying to do that and incorporating those results when those sorts of things are available. And then I'm putting another one in as we speak, but I should probably pause. I don't know. I won't pause. I'll just get them all out there. People can respond to what they want. Imputation methods. I think missingness is such a huge issue in all of our analyses. Some really concerted focus on how to address, how to do imputation in the best way, assess missingness, and so on. I think there's some really promising areas in synthetic data generation that come up with just remarkably similar but completely synthetic versions of data that could be used in creating better imputation approaches than are some of the current ones. And I think it lends itself to good quantitative measurements of method performance through the typical metrics for missing at random, missing completely at random, all the kinds of things you're typically doing to try to understand that. So I think that's maybe a nice playground for a lot of different approaches to kind of addressing different types of imputation. That's my number 4. I'll have more coming through. I can't be stopped. I'm sorry.
just a comment on the imputation. One just extension of that I think is really interesting and is sort of longitudinal imputation. I feel like one of the big limitations of observational data is that we don't have regular measurements the way you can get out of a prospective study. So it makes it hard to do sort of like marginal structural modeling or complex questions that are about multiple decision points like managing A1C. And I think like if you could, particularly the fact that we have these large scale methods, if you could develop some robust way of sort of like predicting on a daily basis what variable values are, or maybe weekly basis, you could really open up a ton of study designs that currently aren't possible with observational data.
So Peter, you've also been adding ideas to the chat. Do you want to comment on some of them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the first one I put out there is actually triggered by some work that Ross has initiated together with the Health Equity Group, and I really like the topic of fairness of prediction modeling. I think there's quite a lot to do there, and also a lot of interest from the broader community, and with trustworthy AI in mind and all those topics that are very sexy at the moment. I think it's great to spend time on that. The other, let me see, there was another one. Yeah, the one on how different is your data from mine is always intriguing me, and because we build models on one database and then apply it in other databases, and then they don't work very well sometimes, and it would be good to learn why that actually is, and if we can build models that would work better on more databases, and I can think of different types of approaches for that. The other one I put in was on imbalanced data. We still struggle with how to deal with very low prevalence outcomes and build good models for that. So there's a lot of work done in that space, but we haven't tried it at large on the OHDSI or on the common data model. And I think it would be very interesting to do some large scale analysis on all those methods and then give some sort of best practices on how to deal with that. And the final point, and I think it's probably the most important one actually, is how can we build models in such a way or apply best practices to it that they really end up in clinical practice, and that we don't spend time on building models that never end up in clinical practice and just a more academic exercise to build them. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and we are really in a very good position to drive that work in general in predictive analytics, I would say, because of the size and the opportunities that we have with the data network and our network of clinicians that are involved as well. So I think this would be a very nice output of the prediction working group if we can focus on that more. I'll stop there. There's much more things, I think, but I'll type them in. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
I strongly agree with those.
So maybe one question, because I'm still very naive. It all seems to be kind of alluding to the same point on, differences between databases, differences between people, so that we can impute the best person that fits into this, person characteristics. Is this more studying the structure, a similar point with the, I think using higher concept, what are the right higher concept? Is it speaking more to clustering question from the statistical perspective? Is it that we know which concepts are more connected, which ones are, appearing together, which people have this, like that similarity question, and that can be generalized to similarity between databases, or I'm completely off?
Well, I definitely think there's overlap here, and then cluster methods is one that we have explored a while ago to look into this problem also for prediction, but I think you can also apply it for the other problems that are raised. Yeah, but I think there are many methods that we can explore, and that's why we need to do the research to answer the question which one is best.
Because that's similarly to safety, the earlier point that we discussed, some PTs appearing together, and then sometimes it's, HLT can be used, like the higher level term. Sometimes it cannot because it's too broad. It really is, again, clustering question.
Yeah, we've seen that with prediction, of course, as well, where we get a huge number of predictors that may all be the same concept actually, and we try to simplify those models by now including experts in the process that group things together. There may be ways and methods that we can think of to automate that process as well and make that more straightforward. We always get the question, how did the experts combine? How did we get to that simpler model? And maybe there's some methods research there as well that we can do.
Sounds fun.
Yep. All right,
And
so go ahead.
Sorry, one quick and again very naive question. Have you guys ever looked at the effects of, policy or standard of care, especially now with COVID and year 2020, 2021, all the regulations and policies, and they're different in different countries. Did anyone ever look at the policy effect or standard care definition in each of the countries?
I don't think so. I know that there have been very small attempts, but I'm not aware of any large-scale OHDSI attempts to look at that. I don't know.
We're building one in the GIS work group. There's our colleagues at the Center for Value, CVER, the name of the acronym is going to skip me, have some excellent databases, some of which include coverage by payers for all but 3 major payers in the United States, which can to some extent be mapped to dates and regions, and we can start to do, once those mappings are done to the clinical data, what the impact of policy coverage decisions are. I feel strongly that it's something the community should do. I made this comment in a symposium a couple years ago. We are really kind of missing an opportunity to do very important work on one of the most important levers that actually changes care. So providing evidence directly that says, we know this policy was in place in this region at this time, and here's what the outcomes look like. If all other things are equal, is going to be really powerful set of analyses to start to do.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks. So one piece of methods research that is on my wish list is basically exploring the whole benefit risk space a bit more. So currently, a lot of our analysis, we focus on the relative risk, which is fine if you look at one exposure, one outcome, but we usually don't look at 20 outcomes or allegedly even more. And it then becomes very hard, what does a relative risk or a hazard ratio of 2 for this outcome mean when the hazard ratio for this other outcome is 3, but the one is much more prevalent than the other. So switching that to more of a risk difference scale is high on my list, and actually non-trivial when you're considering that you need to adjust for things like confounding. And it actually is becoming very relevant now when we look at our vaccines, where we are seeing effects, but for extremely rare events, like things we've never seen before. We now have millions of exposures, so we can see a background rate of 1 in a million, and now there's a relative risk of 2. What does that mean actually? So that's a space I want to get into. And a related question there is how well do our phenotypes capture the phenotypes in relation, well, specifically in terms of sensitivity. So we usually have a pretty good idea of the positive predictive value, but if we say that a particular outcome occurs 1 in a million, is it really 1 in a million, or is it 1 in 100,000, but our sensitivity is just really low? We don't have a good sense of that right now. So anyway, so just to throw that out there, which has been on my mind for a while now, but I hope to spend some time on that in 2022.
Martijn is a very concrete example of that right now with respect to the capture of COVID through more or less sensitive measures. So here I'm transferring what you were describing in terms of the sensitivity of phenotype definition to what's known about the measurement properties of a particular assay. So the rapid tests we know are not sensitive, right? They're very specific, but we know they're very sensitive, but we're not currently capturing that information. They'll weigh into decisions about how to define a phenotype, right? But there's actually quantitative information about measurement pertaining to sensitivity that isn't put into machine readable form so that we can base those decisions on sort of a quantitative understanding of the measurement properties of things like test assays or lab results or so on. It's a much larger issue, but I think to me, it points to a similar concern about missing lots and lots of things because they are not sensitive, and an opportunity, if we had the right metadata collection and preservation strategy of leveraging what's known about things like test assays or lab values. So I probably twisting your intent too far here. Maybe that's just an association I have in my obsession with metadata and wanting to capture better metadata about assessment, but I think it pertains to that same sensitivity issue.
Oh, I agree that that's definitely related. Like, if we know that a specific test is this much sensitive, then if we're relying on that, then that's background knowledge that we should be able to use.
So one thing I think is directly probably coming from prediction is maybe better effect estimate or better prevalence estimate in a particular population, where we can match a person and he would have had this effect without the drug with a particular, probability prevalent, depending on what measure you bring in forward. Because now everything that comes in, it's very wide and population based, but not necessarily reflecting the risk for this particular person.
Yep, that's an excellent point, and I think Peter was also trying to point us to that direction when he talked about heterogeneity of treatment effects, right, Peter? So I think another side of the coin of benefit risk is that you need to make that a little bit more personalized, because you can talk about benefit risk as a whole population, but what you really want to know is, for this patient who is in front of me right now, like what is a benefit risk trade-off for a specific treatment. And yeah, we definitely need to develop better methods for that.
David Meltzer and I'm trying to remember who his colleague was, developed essentially a value of information approach that essentially tried to do that, take the individual characteristics of a patient into account and applying some sort of cost effectiveness. It was more than comparative effectiveness, cost effectiveness approach, a VOI approach that was individualized in some way, and it was very clever. And they advanced it in a way that made it computationally more tractable. I think the original formulation of it was extremely clever, but hard to actually implement because of the computational costs and requirements. But they made some advances on how to approximate the different inputs to that. So I think there's some work there to build on from them. I can put some links in the chat if you want.
Yeah, yes, please.
One thing that's kind of adjacent to that and can kind of have almost an effect of simplifying the clinical approach at the bedside is if, and it's an area we could open up, would be more widespread kind of capture and integration of values and preferences that kind of go into decision making. And to kind of give an example, we can deliberate a lot in the decision, for instance, to anticoagulate somebody in terms of their risk of stroke, in the context of AFib versus their risk of bleed. And you can kind of apply different models and kind of get, numerical estimates of these two things. But if you actually surveyed 100 people and said, how many bleeds would you take before you'd accept a stroke? That number is typically quite high. And so we can deliberate a lot over something where it actually kind of boils down to a bit more of a simple heuristic at the bedside, because most people won't accept, a stroke, and they'll decide kind of more generally on protecting themselves, from that outcome. And so it always kind of struck me that was kind of one of the, that was something that was kind of captured in the CHEST guidelines as one of the first areas I saw it, and it makes you wonder how many other areas we could apply this that actually might reduce the decision space in ways that are kind of robust and that we could implement and have kind of a broad survey type approach that kind of helps kind of inform our prediction models at the bedside.
Yep. Yeah, so we actually have some folks within our company that are very far advanced in preference studies and things like that. It might actually be interesting to have them present to the OHDSI community at one point, just to see what they've been up to. Because yeah, I agree. It's good to know what actually what actually matters to patients.
Yeah, well, and I see Patrick Ryan's comment then. It's almost more of a would you rather framework, you know? Would you rather, right? And so it really kind of gets them to almost kind of create that rank set of, you know, how many of these outcomes did you accept before you'd accept this outcome? Because they may attach different, you know, different meaning to that number needed to treat of a particular outcome.
And so one more wild idea. Can we capture like natural course of the disease, right? All the diagnosis a patient gets along the lifetime in a database. For example, they might come completely made up with a nosebleed, and then they have, you know, blood vessel abnormality diagnosis, etc., so that there are certain things that might be, you know, expected to see next for this patient versus not, and that can guide us in terms of where they're in their disease progression versus if it's completely unseen or shouldn't have happened, might be a side effect of something. So kind of a symptoms timeline.
Yep, I hear what you're saying. And I'm not aware of any. Oh, I think I've seen one or two papers that try to do that, but yeah, we certainly don't have anything in OHDSI that you can just point to a disease and say, give me a natural course of the disease as seen in the data.
Well, we are working on this a bit in Eden, Martijn, with disease trajectories, and I think the SULIF is actually working on an R package on OMOP to visualize disease trajectories, a kind of characterization question.
Okay, great.
Yeah, there's some supplementary knowledge bases that can be, you know, converted into the symptom and just see where those appear for each of the patients. It can be done if it's of interest, I'm sure, to some extent. Obviously, nothing's perfect.
Well, and also maybe related to that, I don't know if people have seen the discussion on the forums that I kicked off on clustering patients, where I'm currently a bit at a loss where to go next. But that also seems to fall into that bucket of given a specific disease or specific phenotype, like what is happening to these people and what do they look like and who are they?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the PhDs is looking at frequent pattern mining, and it's more in the prediction space to see if we can use the frequent patterns in the data as predictors. It's not too successful so far, I must say, but we are at the beginning of it. But yeah, I think this is also related to that. So the order of things that happen and cluster them as one predictor.
Are you clustering on like concept IDs, or are you clustering on phenotypes?
Yeah, so currently, we're looking at different things. So for example, the visits of the GP and see which elements happen, what events happen during the visit, and then create like patterns of that. So that could be only diseases, but also treatment patterns or all kind of different combinations of concepts in the CDM from the different domains. And then making lengths like lengths of 3, 4, 5 things, and then make that an individual predictor. So you can get much more complex models with a simple SU approach by combining multiple concepts into one, like beta value, so to say.
Because we've got such a large number of concept IDs, like clustering and sequential pan mining or frequent pattern mining, like all of these. There's going to be so many different combinations that you're going to have a really low support or whatever it is when you kind of filter. So, and when if you use the phenotype library, you kind of reducing that quite a bit, you might get some more useful things out.
Yeah, scalability is definitely an issue with this, I can tell you. So yeah, that could be helpful.
All right, we're getting close to the end of the hour, so I'm going to give Evan the last word here. Yeah,
I don't want that kind of pressure. I was just going to throw another idea out there. If you want to, you need to sum this meeting up with something something more robust. That's okay. We can always discuss more later.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna do my best to sum up what I heard, but it's a very long list of things that people are interested in. What I noted that there was specific interest in is measuring the effect of policy changes and risk minimization efforts. So instead of currently we focus primarily on treatments, but not on like more of a health care system scale intervention. So that's an interesting one that I saw a lot of people get enthusiastic about. And the other one was about missingness of data, not just imputation, but also like what does it mean for things like sensitivity of a phenotype definition. And also a lot about like differences between databases and differences between points in time in the same database. As a more of a first at a more high level interest, but then later probably like what we learned from that, how do we feed that back into our tools for estimation and prediction. I myself have, of course, a interest in risk benefit with everything that comes with that. And then the last bit, we talked a little bit more about just characterization, but more of an in-depth one. So disease trajectories, frequent patterns, maybe clustering. So different ways of understanding the data than just what we do right now is enumerating features over the entire population. So that's a lot already, and I didn't name everything. So I think we need some way to prioritize what we're doing. And also to Jenna's point already at the start, we need to maybe think a little bit more about how we want to actually shape up this method research and the collaborations that we have within OHDSI, which I don't currently have a good answer to that. But we can certainly continue that discussion at a next meeting. And so with that, just a shout out that we do have regular meetings of the patient level prediction / population level estimation work groups, which we really probably should rebrand to just the method research work group. And actually the next one will be this Thursday at noon Eastern time. So we of course also have a team for that. And so I invite everybody who's interested in methods research to look that up and join the meetings. All right, so we're at the time, and thanks everybody for a very interesting and fruitful discussion. And
thank you guys.
See you all soon.
Bye everyone. Have a great
Bye
Tuesday.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.